This is the Last Man Standing podcast with your host, Richard James.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm Richard James. Listen, I'm amazed at the immaturity that I see in grown men lately. Like men that are older than me, men I looked up to when I was young. I've had so many uncomfortable conversations with men who have grown children and wives, and all of a sudden they just throw everything away. Many would call this a midlife crisis. The truth is these men were not properly built. Their families, careers, and religious lives are a house of cards that become more unstable year after year. Eventually, with a little wind, the cards tumble and their entire lives fall completely apart. Most boys never become men. Sure, their bodies develop into the form of an adult male, and most will likely take a job, marry a woman, raise a child. They might become great athletes. They could become a Navy SEAL or a wealthy entrepreneur, but they might still never become a real man. 1 Corinthians 13:11 says, "When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child, and I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things." There comes a point in life where a male makes an intentional choice to become a man and chooses to leave the immature patterns of boyhood behind him. These decisions lead to a gradual process of development and maturity that will continue throughout his life. The key is to be determined to stay the course. Manhood is a daily decision, not a one-time physiological milestone. Many men choose to stay boys, deciding not to grow up and fully own the responsibility of manhood. In the 1980s, psychologist Dan Kiley called this pattern of behavior Peter Pan syndrome. While there's no formal diagnosis or symptoms that are recognized by the medical or the psychological communities, Peter Pan syndrome is a term that's often used by psychologists to describe a combination of character flaws that are commonly seen in men. Behavior patterns include narcissism, refusal to adopt adult responsibilities, dodging commitment, blame shifting, difficulty maintaining healthy relationships, reliance on others, avoidance of criticism, difficulty expressing emotions, uncontrolled compulsive behavior, a lack of planning or vision for the future, inconsistent or unstable work performance, and there's many others. Just like Peter Pan and the Lost Boys, many men find themselves in such a self-focused, pleasure-seeking, responsibility-dodging mindset that they lose touch with reality. They form their own personal Neverland, refusing to fully engage in their real lives that are happening outside of the fantasy they live in. This type of behavior is common and mostly appropriate for children. They don't have to be responsible. They don't have to work. They don't have to provide anything for themselves. Everything's provided for them for free. They have unlimited opportunities to try again when they act out. They get treated like champions for stupid accomplishments. In short, they contribute nothing and the entire world revolves around them. But a man has to put these attitudes behind him. Men need to destroy their narcissistic inner child. A boy's core drivers are focused mostly on himself, but a man's focus is mostly outside of himself. He's submitted to God, accountable to other men and women, and he pours his life into serving and leading others. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you going to do for others?" A self-focused life is empty. It's fruitless. Consider the good fruit that comes from investing in your marriage, pouring into your children, contributing in your community, serving in your church, and giving to other people. A man must take full responsibility for his own life. Unfortunately, we live in a culture that has begun to adopt these Marxist values. This ideology promotes victimhood, blame shifting, and entitlement. All traits of children, not men. Churchill famously said, "The price of greatness is responsibility." A true man takes ownership of his life, his decisions, and his actions. He takes responsibility for his failures as well as his successes. Most men in modern culture have lost the skill of self-reliance. Men have long had reputations for being too independent, meaning they aren't accountable to mentors or to brothers, and they live in isolation as lone wolves. This trait is a destroyer of men. It's not actually what I'm referring to when I describe self-reliance. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, there were boys and there were men. The ideas of adolescence and the invention of teenagers were not commonly accepted in the culture. You were a boy, which is a consumer, or you were a man who was a producer. Today, more than 55% of men aged 18 to 29 still live with their parents. Why? Because boys are refusing to take full responsibility for their lives and become producers. They remain comfortable in the safety net of their childhood home, consuming mom and dad's resources more than a decade beyond the socially acceptable norm throughout history. Did you know that there's no animal in creation that allows physically mature offspring to remain in the nest or the den? Once they can fend for themselves, once they're physically mature, they are sent out to go begin their life. This process obviously works. Now, I don't consider human beings to be animals, but I do think that it raises an important question. Have we given men too much space between physical and emotional maturity and throwing them out of the nest? If you want to be a man, you must learn to think like a man. A man and a boy both desire freedom more than just about anything. The difference is that the boy believes he's entitled to it, where the man recognizes the price that's attached to it. He realizes that freedom isn't free. It requires discipline, hard work, persistence, sacrifice, patience, suffering, etc. A man recognizes that his thoughts are ground zero for what his life will produce. If he thinks in terms of lack, he will have a life that's filled with lack. If he thinks in terms of abundance, he'll live an abundant life. For a Christian, a man is instructed to take every thought captive and bring it under the authority of the Word of God. This means that a man intentionally cultivates a garden in his mind. He knows that his physical life will produce good fruit, righteousness, peace, and joy, or bad fruit, sin, death, strife, sickness, poverty, all based on what thoughts he plants or weeds out according to Christ. A man chooses to put his feelings in their place. A child in many ways is led by their emotions. The truth is far less important to them than how they're feeling. I'm often surprised at how many men I meet who are in their 50s or 60s and still live from a place of their feelings rather than the realities of life. I don't feel like going to work today, or I'm not feeling very appreciated. May be valid concerns, but they did not get to drive your life. Now, I can't prove this, but I have a strong sense that most crowning achievements in human history did not occur because someone felt like it. A man must intentionally deal with his emotions. He must learn how to control, not suppress them. He must absolutely find healthy outlets to express them, and he must know how to think, speak, and act separately from how he might be feeling. A man has to commit. Lost boys dodge commitment because they don't believe their own BS. Commitment conflicts with the Neverland fantasy of freely doing whatever you want, whenever you want. Every man must determine for himself what to commit to and what to refuse according to his own values, discernment, and conviction. Then he must hold himself integrous with that commitment. Jesus said simply, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Don't be flaky. Commit to profitable and righteous things and follow through. I'm going to sum it up with this. True freedom comes from discipline, not from denial and fantasy. Joy and fulfillment come from serving others, not yourself. Stop waiting for life to happen to you and go make something happen with your life. Leave the childish things behind and go out and be a man. That's all we have for today. As always, I'd like to invite you to check out the blog at lastmen.us. I'd like you to sign up for the newsletter, our weekly habit challenge at habitchallenge.net. That's habitchallenge.net, where every week I send out a new challenge that you can do in less than 1 minute. Check out our socials at LastMenTribe on TikTok and Instagram. Thanks for hanging with me today. I'm Richard James.
Thanks for listening to the Last Men Standing podcast. Please like, subscribe, and share. Visit our weekly blog at lastmen.us.